All right, I've gone ahead and restored the original version of this treetemplate.ai file found inside the 10 Pathfinder folder. I'm going to turn off the drawing layer, turn back on my tree lines layer, and click on it to make it active. Now in this exercise, we're going to assign a series of stroke values to these limbs in order to construct a rough tree. And as you see, these line weights are going to go a long way toward turning this collection of disconnected lines into something that really does resemble a primitive tree shape. Now, if you were brave enough to go ahead and draw your own tree limbs, good on you, because that kind of experience is going to serve you well in the future. And I'll make sure that you can follow along. If you're working inside of my file with my tree lines, then it should be pretty darn easy. All right, so go ahead and twirl open this tree lines folder. And if you're working on a drawing layer, that's fine as well. And then I'm going to scroll down to this trunk item right there, and I'm going to make it active. So I'll go ahead and meatball that item. And up here inside the control panel, I'm going to change the stroke value to 20 point because that ends up looking pretty darn good. Now, if you have any questions about that, what I ended up doing when I was first feeling my way through this file, I went ahead and meatballed this layer up here in the control panel. I changed its opacity to 50%, and that way I could see through my strokes to the underlying tracing template. And then I grabbed something like that trunk right there, and I clicked inside the stroke option up here in the control panel, and I pressed the up arrow to increase that stroke value like so. So I'm incrementally increasing the line weight. And at a point, I decided that it looked pretty darn good at 20 points, like so. And that's what I did with the other limbs as well. All right, so just so you have a sense of where I'm getting these values from. Where the roots are concerned, they're fairly thin because only slight portions of the roots are popping out of the ground. So I selected roots 1, that first group of root lines, and I changed the stroke value there to 4 point. And then I went ahead and grabbed roots 2. And again, those of you who drew your own root and limb lines, just decide which guys belong in which category. It's really up to you. Just bear in mind, we're going for something that looks moderately like this right here. So I'm trying to sort of get close to this end goal with the understanding that I'm going to go in and erase those lines in order to create much more naturalistic effects. All right, anyway, back to the illustration at hand. I've selected the roots 2 group, and I'm going to change the stroke to 2 point this time around. All right, now where the limbs are concerned, we're going to go thicker. So I'll go ahead and meatball limbs 1 here inside the layers panel, and that's this first group of limbs right there. And I'll click inside that line weight value, and I'll change it to 10 points. So I've gone precipitously down here from 20 point for the trunk down to 10 point for the first row of limbs. And I've got little boys, I should just say that. So I'm very familiar with watching them climb trees. And one of the things you learn as a parent watching your little monkeys climb up trees is that the tree limbs get very thin very quickly. And so that first rung of limbs can hold their weight, and after that it starts falling apart pretty quickly. So that's why I'm going with this. And also, of course, I just took a cue from what I'm seeing in that photographic template. All right, now I'll go ahead and meatball limbs 2, and I'll change the line weight value to 8 point for these. It's 20 point for the trunk, it's 10 point for the first rung of limbs, and then we're going 8 point, 6 point, 4 point, 3 point, 2 point. And I don't expect you to remember that when I race through it, but I'm just providing you with a preview of where I'm going. So these guys, limbs 2, those are 8 point limbs. Then limbs 3, I'll go ahead and meatball them. I'm going to switch them out to 6 point limbs. And then I'll go to limbs 4, and coincidentally, those are my 4 point limbs. And notice there's an awful lot of those inside the tree. I'll go ahead and change that line weight value to 4 point like so. And then I'll switch to limbs 5. And I'll change those guys to 3 points. So now, instead of reducing the line weight in 2 point increments, I'm reducing it now in 1 point increments as we get closer to the final limbs. So I'll change those to 3 point. Then the final limbs are limb 6, by the way. These are the last limbs. Lots and lots of those. And I'll change the line weight value there to 2 point. And we're basically done with stroking the tree. So I'll click off of those paths. And I'm also, by the way, going to go ahead and meatball the entire tree lines layer and change that opacity value back to 100%. So I can more or less see what I'm doing. And this is the result, which looks pretty darn good, I have to say. However, I'm going to go and zoom in so that we can take in these limbs a little more closely. You can see that one of the big problems at this point is that each one of these limb lines is exactly uniform in weight, which doesn't work at all. If I turn off this tree lines layer here, you can see that the limbs get incrementally narrower as you progress up the tree. So they don't just suddenly go from 8-point to 6-point, for example. That's not going to work. The other problem that I'm seeing here is that we've got all these little gaps in between the limbs, so it's as if the tree is some kind of wacky super puppet. And I don't want that either. So I need to add some variable line weights. I also need to fill in the gaps, and I'll show you how to do both of those in the next exercise.